Welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. Today, we start the book of Judges. I love the book of Judges. It covers roughly 350 years, all right? That's a lot. And if you kind of go through there and you add up all the times that the judges were ruling and you add up all the times that the people were being oppressed, you'll get about 350 years, not quite. And so some of it's overlap. You want to probably get a little bit more than that, but there's some overlap in some of these time frames. And so about 350 years, you're pretty safe if that's what you wanted to say. You could say it's about 350 years. So the book of Judges, though, chronologically does not begin, well, I guess technically it begins in chapters 1 and 2, because in chapters 1 and 2, you have the death of Joshua again. But after chapters 1 and 2, you need to jump to chapter 17. Chapter 17 and 18 occur right after 1 and 2. So if you're reading it chronologically, you're going to read chapters 1 and 2, and then chapters 17 and 18, and then you're going to jump 19 through 21, and then back to chapter 3. And let me show you why, okay? It'll make a lot more sense, but you're going to have to listen to today and tomorrow to kind of piece it all together, but I'll help you with that. So today, Judges 17 and 18, episode 64, and we're calling it Idolatry and the Tribe of Dan. So book of Judges, about 350 years. There was a man in the hill country, wow, try that again. There was a man in the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, "The 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse and also spoke in my ears, behold, the silver is with me. I took it." And the mother said, "Blessed be my son by the Lord." So a couple of things, this is interesting. His mom is going, somebody stole 1,100 pieces of silver from me. And she pronounces a curse. And then Micah goes, yeah, so mom, something to tell you here. I'm the one who stole your 1,100 pieces of silver. And her response is, "Blessed be my son of the Lord." And this whole scenario is just strange to me. So he restored, verse 3, he restored the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. And the mother said, "I dedicate this silver to the Lord from my hand for my son to make a carved image and a metal image, and therefore I will restore it to you." So mom's response is, "Oh, thank you for giving me the 1,100 pieces of silver back. I'm going to give them to you so that you can do what? Make an idol, right? This is just showing you how depraved they are, so that you can make an idol and I will restore it to you." So when he restored the money to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to the silversmith, who made it into a carved image and a metal image. So let's put all this together. Mom has 1,100 pieces of silver. Son steals the 1,100 pieces of silver. Mom goes, "Cursed be whoever stole my 1,100 pieces of silver." He goes, "Yo, mom, it was me. Sorry about that." She goes, "Man, you're blessed by God. Way to go, son. And I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take those 1,100 pieces of silver and I'm going to turn them into a household idol, a God that we can worship, basically." She's going to take the 1,100 pieces of silver. But what does she do? She gets the money back and takes 200 pieces of silver. She's not even faithful in her idolatry. It's just crazy. Like, this is just so depraved here. I don't know if we catch how depraved these first few verses are. And so she makes an idol for them to worship, for her and her son to worship. Verse 5. And the man had a shrine, and the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household gods and ordained one of his sons to become his priest. Isn't that crazy? So he ordains one of his own sons to become his priest. He makes an ephod. He makes household gods. So essentially, he makes his house be a small little tabernacle of the Lord, and they're going to serve idols. And he ordains his own son as a priest. Just wickedness here. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Pay attention to that in the book of Judges. Now there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. Now, why is a Levite living in Bethlehem? Well, because in the book of Joshua, the Levites had no inheritance of their own, and they received 48 cities within the other tribes of Israel. And so this is a Levite who is living within the tribe of Bethlehem. And that man, this Levite, departed from the town of Bethlehem in Judah to sojourn wherever he could find a place. And as he journeyed, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. Micah said to him, "Where do you come from?" He said, "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to sojourn wherever I can find a place to stay." Micah said, "Stay with me and be to me a father." Look at this. Look at the depravity. "Be to me a father and a priest, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver and a suit of clothes for your living." And the Levite went in. Now, Micah has already made his son a priest. Now his son's being kicked out, and this Levite's going to become the priest. And he's like, "Good, I've got a Levite now for my own personal priest. He can help us serve our idols." There was a band in around 2001 called 10 Shekel Shirt. and I liked them, a Christian band. This is where they got their name, 10 pieces of silver and a suit of clothes. This is where they took their name from. And I did not know that at the time, but now it kind of makes me wonder, why'd you name your band that? Because this is a priest who's not serving the Lord. So if you listen to 10 Shekels Shirt back in the early 2000s, now you know where they got their name. The Levite was contented to dwell with Micah, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. Micah ordained the Levite. Isn't that interesting? He ordained the Levite, even though the Levites were already ordained by God to serve around the tent of meeting. And the young man became his priest and was in the house of Micah. And Micah said, now I know the Lord will prosper me because I have the Levite as a priest. Can you imagine this? Like this guy Micah and his mom serving an idol, consecrating Micah's own son to be a priest, taking a Levite and consecrating him to be a priest of their household gods. And he goes, now God will bless me because I have a Levite as my priest. Now, chapter 18 is going to help us with the timeline. Verse 1, in those days there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the people of Dan was seeking for itself an inheritance to dwell in, for until then no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. So this gives us our time frame. The Danites had not yet received their inheritance. And when did they get their inheritance? Well, it was initially given to them in Joshua 19, 40 through 48, when Joshua divided the land. And so he had given the Danites their inheritance. But if you go back to Joshua 19, 40 through 48, it says they lost it immediately. So the Danites, Joshua is like, hey guys, here's your inheritance. And the Danites immediately lose control of it and are like, we don't know where to go. Let's go find us a new place to live. So this is what shows us that this isn't 350 years into the people living in the land of Canaan. This is at the beginning. This is right after the Danites had received their portion, which takes us all the way back to Joshua 19. And it predates kind of like Joshua's dead now. So they got their inheritance, and sometime before Joshua died or right around Joshua's death, the Danites lose their inheritance, and they're still looking for an inheritance. So that's what takes us back and makes this a really old part of the book of Judges. This is before all the other things have taken place. So the people of Dan are looking for an inheritance. And the city that they end up living in at the end of this story is the city that we hear about in Joshua 19 that they end up taking over after they lose their inheritance. So it says this, verse 2 of 18. So the people of Dan sent 5 able men from the whole number of their tribe, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to explore it. And then they said to them, come and explore the land. And they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and they stayed there. When they were by the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. And how they recognized that voice, we don't know. And they turned aside and said to him, who brought you here? What are you doing here in this place? What's your business here? And he said, this is how Micah has dealt with me. He has hired me, and I've become his priest. And they said, inquire then of God, please, that we may know whether the journey we are on will succeed. And the priest said, go in peace. The journey on which you go is under the eye of the Lord. Whether that's true or not, who knows? Then the 5 men departed, and they came to Laish, which is mentioned in Joshua 19:47, slightly different spelling, but the same city. And they saw the people there, how they lived in security after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and unsuspecting, lacking nothing that is in all the earth, and possessing wealth, and how they were far from the Sidonians and had no dealings with anyone. When they came to their brothers at Zorah and Eshtaol, their brothers said to them, what do you have to report to us? And they said, let's go against these people, for we've seen the land. Behold, it's very good. And will you do nothing about it? Don't be slow to go to enter in and possess the land. As soon as you go, you will come to an unsuspecting people. The land is spacious, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is in the earth. Now again, this is them saying God has given it into their hands. This is a wicked, idolatrous priest saying that God has given it into their hands. God gave them an inheritance in Joshua 19. That's the inheritance he gave into their hands, and they lost it. They weren't faithful to God, these Danites. So, verse 11, so 600 men of the tribe of Dan, armed with weapons of war, set out from Zorah and Eshtaol, and they went up and encamped at Kiriath Jearim in Judah. On this account, the place is called Menahem Dan to this day. Behold, it is west of Kiriath Jearim. So they camped in the region of Judah on their way. They passed on from there to the hill country of Ephraim, and they came again to the house of Micah. Then the 5 men who had gone to scout out the country of Laish said to the brothers, do you not know that in these houses are an ephod, right, the linen covering of the priest, household gods, a carved image, and a metal image? Now therefore consider what you'll do. And they turned aside there. They came into the house of the young Levite at the home of Micah and asked him about his welfare. And the 600 men of the Danites, armed with weapons of war, stood at the entrance of the gate. And the 5 men who had gone to scout out the land went up, entered, and took the carved image, the ephod, the household gods, the metal image, while the priest stood at the entrance of the gate, and the 600 men there with their weapons of war. When these went into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, the household gods, and the metal image, the priest said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Be quiet about it. Keep your hand over your mouth and come with us and be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for you to be a priest to a house of one man in Israel or to be a priest of a whole tribe?" Do you see here again the depravity, right? Do you see here again the wickedness of these people? They're saying, don't serve one man, come serve a whole tribe, come serve the Danites. They're not interested in serving God. What have they done? They've taken this new ephod, they've taken the new carving, they've taken the new idols, and they've said, come and serve us. And so they turned, so he took the ephod and the household. Look at what it says here in verse 20. The priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod and the household gods and the carved image and went along with the people. So they turned and departed, putting the little ones and the livestock and the goods in front of them. When they had gone some distance from the home, Micah and the men who were in Micah's houses near Micah's house were called out, and they overtook the people of Dan. And they shouted to the people of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, "What's the matter with you? Why are you chasing us with such a company?" And he said, "You took my gods that I made and my priest, and you go away. What do I have left? How can you ask me what's the matter with you?" And the people of Dan said to him, "Don't let your voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows fall upon you and you lose your life and the lives of your households." Now, this is kind of the character of Dan. That's like, don't raise your voice to us. We have wicked men among us. They'll put you to death and they'll put your whole household to death. In Genesis 49:17, when Jacob gives the blessing to the 12 tribes, here's what he says of Dan. He says, "Dan is a serpent who lies along the way and strikes at the heel of the horses and throws his riders." So like, that's what's said of Dan. Dan is not, not much is mentioned good about Dan. Then the people of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and he went back to his home. But the people of Dan took what Micah had made and the priest who belonged to him, and they came to Laish, a people quiet and unsuspecting, and struck them with the edge of the sword and burned the city with fire. And there was no deliverer because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone else. It was in the valley that belongs to Beth Rehob, and they rebuilt it. And they rebuilt the city and lived there. And they named the city Dan after the name of their ancestor who was born to Israel. But the name of the city was Laish at first. And then listen to this. This is interesting. And the people of Dan set up the carved image for themselves. And then it gives us the name now of this priest. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until that day of the captivity of the land. So they set up Micah's carved image that he made as long as the house of God was at Shiloh. So the Danites are not going to worship in Shiloh anymore. They're not going to the tent of meeting anymore. They're worshiping in their own clan these idols with this priest. Now, this is what's going to be interesting. Some of your texts, some of your translations are going to read this way in verse 30. It's going to say, Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh. That's what it's going to say, Manasseh, one of the tribes, rather than Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Moses. And there's a lot of debate about this, about whether it's Moses or Manasseh. Now, we know that Moses has a son named Gershom. We know that. That's told for us in the scripture. And so it would make sense for it to be Moses. But let me just give you a little bit of history on this, because this is something really intriguing. You can look this up. I did a little bit of research on it myself, but I encourage you to do the same. If you look up G.F. Moore, G.F. M-O-O-R-E, and you look up his commentary on Judges, it's written about 1918. And I believe it was on page 420 where you'll find this note in the book of Judges, roughly page 420. And what's interesting about it is he does this huge historical kind of context. Listen, almost every Hebrew manuscript of this text says Moses. Almost every one of them. There's almost no textual support for the translation of the son of Manasseh. But check this out. Josephus, who was a Jewish historian that lived in the first couple of centuries, or a Jewish historian that lived, I think, in the 2nd century, don't hold me to that, BC, 2nd century AD, Josephus says, and some other people say, that Moses was dropped from this text and Manasseh was inserted because they didn't want Moses to come off looking bad. The Jews wanted to protect Moses' reputation, so they dropped Moses from the text and inserted Manasseh in later text. But almost every text we have, almost every one of them that we have, that we've based our Bible on, that the Jews based their Old Testament scriptures on, almost every one of them initially said Moses, and Manasseh was added way later. And I bet you if you look in your footnote of your Bible, you'll see the same thing. So here's the thing that's interesting, and this gives us our timeline again. We know that Moses died right before the people entered the promised land. We know that his son Gershom was born before they left Egypt, right? And this is the son of Gershom, Jonathan. So this is not 300, cannot be 350 years later, because this is just the grandson of Moses, right? And it is the descendant of Moses that's leading these people into this idolatry, is probably what's happening here. Now, here's what's crazy also is in Revelation 7, 4 through 8, there is a mention of the 144,000 Jews from each tribe that are set apart for redemption and for holiness. And you know the only tribe that's not mentioned there? The only tribe that's not mentioned of the 144,000 is the tribe of Dan. So the tribe of Joseph formerly was split into Ephraim and Manasseh, and we see Joseph and one of his descendants. We see Joseph and Manasseh mentioned. Dan's not mentioned anywhere. Dan's not included in this blessing in the book of Revelation, and you kind of have to wonder if it has something to do with their idolatry here. But remember, Judges 1 and 2, and then Judges 17 and 18. And tomorrow will be in 19, 20, and 21, because those also occur before the rest of the book of Judges. But we'll see you then. Bye. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible through another section of Scripture where we come to know and understand God a little bit better. Look, if you're brand new to Simpler Bible, we have all sorts of resources available for you. Go to our website, simplerbible.com, and there you can find these videos, you can find our podcast, you can find links to our social media, and you can even find a blog post with additional scriptures if you want to go into a little bit more study than we had time to cover in this podcast and video today. We hope that this tool will be exactly that for you, a tool. Not something that replaces your daily walk with God, but something that enhances your daily walk with God and helps you to know and enjoy Him more. Thank you so much for being part of this, and we'll see you again tomorrow.